At many traditional Gracie schools, there's a myth that's told about the invention of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It goes something like this. There was a great judo and traditional jiu-jitsu practitioner named Mitsuyo Maeda who traveled from Japan to Brazil teaching judo and jiu-jitsu. Someone named Carlos Gracie went to one of his demonstrations, was intrigued, and then became his student. From there, he learned jiu-jitsu and made modifications along with the help of his sickly, weak brother, Helio Gracie. The myth goes something like this. Helio Gracie was weak, frail, unable to do the traditional moves that were taught to Carlos, so he had to make his own modifications. Things like where you place the grips on the cross-collar choke, how you specifically apply the triangle choke, the position of guard, for example. This is a myth, and it's not very true to reality. There's a book called Choke, The Untold Story of Jiu-Jitsu in Brazil, 1856 to 1949, written by Roberto Piedra. And in this book, he actually breaks down this myth and describes the reality of Helio Gracie's condition. Helio Gracie was someone who was smaller than the average individual, maybe 140 to 160 pounds, fluctuating depending on how much food and water he's eaten that day. But the myth of him being weak, sickly, and frail doesn't hold up to reality. Helio Gracie was a very important figure in the foundation of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Not only did he fight in many different challenge matches in the early days of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, when it was transitioning away from traditional Jiu-Jitsu, which was more all-encompassing combat style, and Judo, which was more sport-oriented, focusing on the throws and the stand-up, and becoming its own martial art, where it was more focused on the ground fighting and ultimately surviving until a submission. But he taught students, and he helped set the legacy for it. But it was this persistent myth that he was sickly, frail, and weak, and it was because of that that he needed to innovate this Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu new style that was coming about. And this served as a very powerful marketing term because it gave the idea that Jiu-Jitsu could be for anyone. Because if the reason it was invented was because someone was weak, sickly, and fragile, then anybody could come and practice this sport, and they wouldn't have to be strong, in shape. They could be anybody. And I think that's the reason why this myth has persisted, even to this day. Some schools still tell this as the foundation of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But in the book Choke, there is a lot of documentation about Helio participating in extensive swimming, different interviews from people who knew him personally, and just the fact that he was able to do these challenge matches and train jiu-jitsu means he was very in shape. He wasn't a very stocky individual. He was a smaller person in general, but this insistence that he was weak and frail is not the truth. Just simply based on the fact that he was able to participate in these challenge matches. If you've ever done jiu-jitsu, you know it takes a lot of energy. Yes, you can be a little bit more relaxed, you can be a little bit more technical, you can even finish certain matches with less energy, but if you actually study how these matches against judo practitioners and all other types of challengers in the no-holds-barred traditional challenge Gracie matches, you can just infer that it took a lot of physical prowess to compete in these. And if you've met an advanced practitioner who's on the smaller side, the act of practicing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu itself will get you in shape. It will get you a certain kind of physicality that you can't get in other places. It's that isometric squeezing, it's the tension, it's the stabilizer muscles, it's the grip strength. And this physicality that he gained over time is evident just based off the fact that he did these challenge matches in and of itself. So this powerful myth that Helio Gracie was weak and frail is not necessary. It was a very powerful marketing term back when there were numerous jiu-jitsu schools in Brazil, and the Gracies specifically were trying to set themselves apart. The Gracies were excellent marketers, And in the most favorable light, this can be stretching the truth because he was on the smaller side. But the fact of the matter is, being stronger, being more physically capable will make your jiu-jitsu better. I have personally experienced the difference between trying to do jiu-jitsu at 160 pounds versus 180, 185 pounds. And it's way easier at 185 pounds. Those additional pounds make a difference. If you are stronger, you will be better at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. If you weigh more, you will be better at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because you can use that physicality, that weight, to impose your will on somebody else. And yes, leverage, technique, skill, these things will make you better at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And if you are significantly better than your opponent and you're small, you can beat them. But the majority of the time, in absolute divisions, when the small person goes up against the big person, put your money on the big person. Not that we're betting on challenge matches, but this myth needs to stop because it's not true. And it can give people a false sense of confidence. Now, it may have gotten some people into the sport that wouldn't have gone into the sport otherwise, but it's a lie. And the fact of the matter is, additional physicality will get you further in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu if you're talking about absolute grappling strength. You can do certain techniques to mitigate this size disparity. For example, if you can isolate the person's leg and go for a heel hook, there really isn't much of a strength disparity that's going to allow you to straighten that, heel hook out. But arm bars, I've gone against people who are strong enough to pull their arm back in, specifically when I was smaller, newer, and more starting out. Now, obviously, technique can allow you to get those submissions against strength, but if I was going up against someone who was way, way stronger than me, I'd have a much harder time submitting them. If they were as skilled as me and they were stronger than me, they would beat me. That's just the fact of the matter. So this lie that Helio Gracie was sick, weak, and frail needs to stop because it's not true. Debate me in the comments.